Yeah, I look at it a ton. I'll be honest with you. Probably like my first thing in the morning once I get up is I look at like D3 Datacast.
Welcome to a D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder, joined by Matt Snyder, who is sporting the ever popular crewneck sweatshirt featuring that classic D3 Datacast wordmark. Matt, it's looking good. Are you feeling good?
As my kids say, it's not a sweatshirt, it's a crew neck.
All right, Matt, we're in for our second set of regional rankings this year. We're once again going to go through, give everyone a good look at what to expect. Hopefully with some pretty good accuracy. I think we did pretty well last week. We've spent some time going through what we expect for this week. But first, let's talk about the top 25. You've got a new ballot due. Could you take us through it for this week, please?
Yeah, let's take a look at what I submitted to d3hoops.com for my top 25 ballot of the week. Kind of hanging up top three are pretty constant from last week. Hampton City, Randolph, Macon, John Carroll at the top. Trinity, Connecticut, and Trinity, Texas come up a little bit. There were some losses that we had that dropped a few teams. Oswego State, Cal Lutheran jumps up into the top 10 for me, I think for the first time maybe. Guilford, Keene State, and Shrine then rounding out the top 10. Feeling pretty good about kind of those teams as my top 10-ish teams. And then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, let's say. Maybe 16 through Johns Hopkins. NYU, Case, Platteville, Calvin, Widener, Johns Hopkins. Feeling really solid about those teams kind of in the middle of my ballot as well. From there on, it gets kind of a little bit up in the air. I think a lot of similar teams that I've had in the past going on as well. Maybe some turnover at the bottom of my ballot. Back in are Christopher Newport and Emory, and in for maybe the first time all season is Illinois Wesleyan for me. I think they've been playing really well in the CCIW. Got 2 wins this week, Elmhurst and Carthage. I think, I wouldn't say they're playing as well as anyone in the country right now, but I think as far as the teams that are in the mix from, kind of that 20 to 35 range that we talk about all year, I think for me, Illinois Wesleyan is one of those teams I'm going to try out this week. I think they've been playing very well. And I think the Titans have a deserved entry into my ballot here. And then Emory back at 25. UAA is tough. They've had some tough results. This week was 2 wins for them. Most of the games they've been in all season have been close. So I'm betting on Emory in the future to maybe perform or outperform how they performed in the past.
You can really appreciate the pairs you have throughout your ballot, Matt. I don't know if you've noticed it or not. You've got the ODAC pair, you've got the Trinity pair, you've got the UAA pair down at 11, 12. You've got the American Rivers pair, 19, 20.
Yeah, for a lot of those,
I
not
don't
the
know if they,
American Rivers pair, but for a lot of
yeah.
those, like NYU and Case split a season series. They've both been very competitive in a very strong conference. Hampton City, Randolph, Macon split a season series. They've both been competitive in a top conference. So sometimes for me, it's a little hard. Once you're talking about one, you're pretty much talking about the other, and you're going to pair them up one way or the other.
All right, so a top 25 is all well and good, Matt, but as we know, it's really the regional ranking system that is super important, especially this time of year as it's starting to develop. And then that's what we carry through to make tournament selections and seeding and how the bracket gets set up and everything. So we have our second set of regional rankings. This will be our first set in which we actually get a ranked look at each region. Last week we found out who was ranked, but it was presented in alphabetical order. So Matt, our job becomes a little more difficult this week. It's not just about creating a bucket of teams. We have to not only do that, but we have to start putting them in some sort of order, which we had our own simulated rack call, went through it. And so let's get into it. Unlike last week where we started with Region 10, we showed our whimsy. We're going once again back to 1 through 10 order. Region 1, Matt, take us through it.
Yeah, Region 1 ended up being a region for us, I think, similar to last week, was fairly straightforward. I don't think we made a whole lot of flips based on kind of my loose ordering that my computer puts the teams in. We feel pretty good about Trinity, Connecticut, number 1, Tufts, number 2, and Williams, number 3. I think those fell into place pretty easily for us. And then I think it was more of a discussion with St. Joseph, Albertus Magnus, and Connecticut College. St. Joseph and Albertus having very similar resumes there as far as winning percentage and strength of schedule. Connecticut College a little bit disparate between those. They have a lower winning percentage and a higher strength of schedule. So we had to dive in a little bit. We kind of did a kind of 3-team comparison there to kind of separate that order. We knew those 3 teams were all going to be ranked. We weren't sure what order we wanted to have them in. And then the end of the region, we thought Morrisville State was clearly in still. We saw them in the alphabetical rankings last week, and we thought Westfield State, Amherst, Worcester State clearly out for us. So, Zach, I don't know if you want to talk us through a little bit what we thought about St. Joseph, Albertus, and Conn College.
Yeah, but first, you briefly touched on it. I just want to help highlight the point here just a little bit about this process, especially for people who have maybe already started making a habit of going to d3datacast.com, clicking on that regional ranking tab, and seeing that, there's a presented ranked order for each tab. Just over the years following this process, also just some of the input that we feel like we got from this previous set last week. You've kind of developed a fake rating that does an automatic sorting. And even on that page, I know sometimes people have sent messages wondering why this team is above this team. And there's a disclaimer at the top of the page that says, basically, it's an automated process that does not take into account things like head-to-head or common opponents. So, hey, if someone wants to make a mental adjustment, they're free to do so, right? So, while the regional ranking page on d3datacast.com will show the current, accurate, up-to-date winning percentage, strength of schedule, note what the regional ranked opponent wins are and what the record is for games played against regional ranked opponents. There's not necessarily a sorting mechanism that includes things like head-to-head result and common opponents. So what we did was kind of use that initial fake rating, as it's labeled on the site, and then tried to look into it a little bit more to see maybe where are those cases where a manual adjustment is necessary, right? So that's kind of the starting point. As you mentioned, we did do a multi-team comparison between Conn College, St. Joseph, Connecticut, and Albertus Magnus. And setting it up that way, Matt, I think we've got a slide here where we show all three in not exactly maybe what a committee who's doing a multi-team comparison would be looking at, but just for our own purpose, something that another spreadsheet that you created just to help bring up any head-to-head results and common opponents there. We felt that there wasn't really anything to be gained in terms of common opponents. All three went 3-0 against Mitchell, Emmanuel, and Johnson and Wales. Yeah, so really what we came down to is looking at the interaction between some of the head-to-heads that are between the three. All three have not necessarily played each other, but based on the interaction of the heads-to-head that were there, we came out with the order of St. Joseph, Connecticut, Albertus, and Conn College. Of course, St. Joseph has beaten Albertus. Albertus has a win over Conn College. And so that's kind of how it all shook out in our minds.
Yeah, and this is one the committee could go a different way than we did. I don't think that we're for sure in what we did. You just explained our process. They were close enough that we wanted to compare them all together. Once we compared them all together, we saw that St. Joseph beat Albertus, beat Conn College. And then for us, that was enough of a factor to kind of order them boom, boom, boom. I could maybe see the committee saying Connecticut College, their strength of schedule is so much higher, and that outweighs the winning percentage and yada, yada, and maybe they're up there. So I don't think we're 100% on the order, but I think we feel really, really good about the process we went through and that being a reasonable order there in Region 1.
All right, moving on to Region 2.
Region 2 for us, Keene State, we saw them take a loss this weekend, but I don't think that's going to cause them too many problems in this region. I think they're number one for sure there. They have a very similar strength of schedule to Nichols, a better winning percentage, and the regionally ranked opponents jump off the page. They're 4-2 versus regionally ranked. Nichols is just 1-2. But that 1-2, I think, should be okay for Nichols. Their strength of schedule will compare favorably to like a Clark. And then their winning percentage is so much higher that I think that they're strong number 2 in the region. Could have an interesting discussion between Clark and WPI. They have, Clark has the lower winning percentage, higher strength of schedule. WPI has the reverse. But of course, WPI and Clark have played. They're in the same conference. Clark beat WPI twice. That 2-0 head-to-head is going to be a very significant factor, I feel, in the rankings. And that's going to be an easy, I think, then discussion ender. When you're trying to kind of compare the resumes, okay, well, if they're close, they've won 2-0, Clark's going to be ahead of WPI. We feel pretty good about Western New England and Brandeis. These are the same 6 teams that were ranked in the alphabetical ranking, similar to Region 1. We feel that these are going to be the same teams in. And then, that discussion, Western New England versus Brandeis, as far as who is 5 and who is 6. There's a strength of schedule gap there, but maybe not so much that it's going to overweigh the winning percentage difference, which is over 100 points, over 130 points or so. That's going to be a big gap there. So Western New England 5, Brandeis 6, probably. This region, we don't see a ton of overwhelming records versus regionally ranked opponents. Brandeis has a win over WashU, who's probably number 1 or number 2 in Region 8. But we don't also know at this point with the alphabetical rankings last week how much the committee is doing to factor in the quality of those regionally ranked wins, or right now if everyone's kind of determined to be equal in regional ranked status after the alphabetical rankings. So we'll have to see there. But I think, Western New England 5, Brandeis 6 is pretty firm, I think.
Yeah, Matt, and we even talked a little bit in terms of a head-to-head between Brandeis and Western Connecticut a little bit, just because they have such different resumes. And just to be clear, as we're coming down to like that last spot in Region 2, it's a bunch of bad options. It's just a matter of what you want to look at. At least in terms of Brandeis compared to WestCon, it's a big winning percentage outlier with Brandeis, but a big SOS outlier with WestCon. Maybe a head-to-head advantage there for Brandeis by way of a win over UMass Dartmouth. But Matt, I think some of the messaging we took away from the first regional rankings is when in doubt, go SOS, which is certainly in Brandeis's favor.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about a really low SOS, Western Connecticut, 451. A non-conference strength of schedule, if we want to look at secondary criteria, only 358. To me, it doesn't really look like Western Connecticut tried to do a whole lot outside of their conference. They're just 1 and 2 versus regionally ranked opponents. That's a good win against Keene State, but I don't think that resume is getting the benefit of the doubt, with that low strength of schedule and that low of a non-conference strength of schedule if they choose to look at that.
And in terms of Endicott there with Brandeis, I mean, it's not that big of a winning percentage difference that I think it's pretty clear that the strength of schedule advantage that Brandeis would have them over Endicott.
Yeah. Yep. All right.
Yeah. Region 3.
Region 3, Oswego State looks really strong at the top. I don't think there's any conversation there. I think they're 7-1 versus regionally ranked opponents right now. That's going to be very strong for Oswego State. Hobart, we went with number 2. They look kind of strong across the board, 4-2 versus regionally ranked opponents. That's going to be very strong there. Then we had a little bit of a discussion. We have 2 Liberty League teams, 2 additional Liberty League teams after Hobart in RPI and St. Lawrence. They have those kind of mid to upper 600 winning percentages with 550-ish SOSs. So not really good winning percentage, but good strength of schedule. And then you have maybe the Empire 8 teams on here, like Utica and Nazareth, who their winning percentages are a lot better, but their strength of schedules are below 500, not great. So where do these 2 pairs of teams maybe stack up with one another? That's a conversation. We ultimately went with the RPI St. Lawrence mix. We went with the higher strength of schedule. Again, when in doubt, go strength of schedule. But we thought, first of all, RPI has beaten St. Lawrence, so that probably puts in a close conversation RPI above. RPI also has the additional regionally ranked win. They've beaten Hobart and St. Lawrence, so that's 2 regionally ranked wins. Those are higher quality than maybe anything the other teams have. And really, 1 regionally ranked win and low strength of schedule is now talking about the Empire 8 teams, Utica and Nazareth. These are not really resumes we've seen the committees jump on, be super high on. So we think that they'll be toward the bottom. Farmingdale kind of splitting the difference there with the really high winning percentage and fairly low strength of schedule. But really that strength of schedule does not really get out of range of a team like Utica. So ultimately, as you can see, what we decided on was RPI St. Lawrence to kind of round out maybe the top half. Then we went Farmingdale, Utica, and Nazareth to end. SUNY New Paltz being just on the outside of the rankings.
We had an interesting discussion just how to deal with Farmingdale with that strength of schedule. And while this is what we came up with, I think, Matt, one of the scenarios we talked about is actually like maybe Nazareth preferable because of there being a little bit more balance to that resume. There's still the winning percentage gap, but a 494, while still under 500, is much better than a 466. And where things really get interesting is because if you feel like Nazareth is a more palatable resume over Farmingdale State, then maybe you also have to look at New Paltz, who has a resume that looks very similar to Nazareth. So ultimately, we thought, Farmingdale with that winning percentage would be okay, but if you start at looking at where maybe if a different decision would be made, then there could be some cascading effects that go beyond just like, flipping 2 places within the regional rankings.
Yeah, if the committee does decide 466, the lowest strength of schedule kind of these teams in the mix, maybe Farmingdale's just out and New Paltz slides in. I don't think that's what's going to happen. We saw Farmingdale was ranked in this region in the alphabetical, but you're right. The committee could absolutely maybe choose to do something like that. And if that happens, that slides Utica up, Nazareth up, and probably New Paltz up, and Farmingdale just out. But I'm doubting that's going to be what we see.
But also just to point out from what could have changed a week ago. Of course, last week being the first regional rankings, there's no regionally ranked opponents to consider. That primary criteria area just didn't exist. It does now. Not that there's a lot to be gained here, but Farmingdale is still 0-0, whereas Utica, Nazareth, New Paltz, and even Brockport, for that matter, do have at least one win against a regionally ranked opponent.
Yep.
So a little bit of a different dynamic. You're right. Farmingdale State was in last week, but everything, the criteria changes, morphs, shifts from week to week. So it's just interesting, even though we ultimately decided to keep Farmingdale State there in the 5 spot, just some interesting things that we'll be looking for when we see the actual regional rankings released on Tuesday afternoon.
And that sort of thing is going to give us a ton of information this week. Last week, all we really knew was who was in and who was out. So we could only learn so much about what the committee was valuing. Also, we didn't have those regionally ranked opponents. We do have those now, and now we know every single case of when they preferred one team to another. So we will learn a whole lot about what these committees, these RACs and the National Committee are valuing. We also get the top 16 reveal coming up on Thursday this week. So we'll get these rankings, how they are in order, and then also somewhat how the tops of the regions stack up against one another. So this is probably like the most meaningful regional rankings as far as learning what the committee is valuing, and we'll get to see that this week.
All right, on to Region 4, Matt, where we have another interesting thing to talk about as we get kind of in the middle of that region.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the interesting thing was, so I'm looking forward to you informing me when we get there. NYU at the top, I think that's going to be fairly clear. Rowan behind them, not too much of a separation, but I think a significant separation there. Rowan, I think, is definitely behind NYU. Then we went with the pair of DeSales and Stevens in the Mac Freedom. I think DeSales was kind of clearly third. Mac Freedom of Stevens was fourth, and I think an interesting question there between Stevens and Stockton that we had.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Okay. Finish out, and we'll talk about it.
The strength of schedule there, and then we ended up with Ramapo and TCNJ. We ultimately decided to go away from Penn State Harrisburg, who we did see ranked in the alphabetical rankings, but you can see their strength of schedule is still the lowest of really anyone who's viable in this region at 490. They do have an 875 winning percentage, which is significant, but they're 0-2 versus regionally ranked. I think that's really going to hurt them compared to most of the teams who have 2, 3, 4 regionally ranked wins in this mix. So we went away from Penn State Harrisburg. They could find their way in for sure, but for right now, just looking at the totality of resumes, even though they have the 875 winning percentage, that's really all they're hanging their hat on right now.
And the interesting thing to consider, Matt, is what we talked about as we were setting this up. We had a discussion about Stockton and Stevens and whether or not at this point the committee will be trying to determine any differentiation between regionally ranked wins and their quality. Because as we've said, this is going to be the first time we actually see rankings within a region, because last week was presented alphabetical. Now, because they are made public alphabetical, doesn't necessarily mean that the racks have some sort of preference order. Or the other way that you could think about it is while some of these teams may not have a ranking within their region, you could at least look at Stevens and say, okay, their best win was Hood, and Hood's profile is this. Mm-hmm. Stockton has a win over Keene State. Look at Keene State and say, okay, their profile is this. And so you could determine some sort of quality between them. We don't know if at this point the committee is willing to do that, or if that's going to be another week when they can start saying, yes, they have a win over a number 1 ranked team, which we expect, Keene State would be, or so ultimately we left Stevens ahead of Stockton. But if there is some sort of determination of how quality those RROs are, that could be something that's in Stockton's favor.
Yes, Stockton, of course, having the win over Keene State, 2 wins over Rowan. Those are 3 wins over a 1 or probably a 2 in a region. That's gonna be a very strong factor in Stockton's favor if we're looking at that. So if we are definitely weighing into those quality of regionally ranked opponents, I think that boosts Stockton's resume more than it does Stevens' resume. And I could very easily see a scenario in which we see DeSales, then Stockton, then Stevens, probably still staying above Ramapo, but we could see a flip there between Stockton and Stevens. So that'll definitely be one to watch when we see the regional rankings. Region 4, what's the exact order, and might again indicate maybe what they were looking at as far as quality of regionally ranked. We see Stockton has more wins, 4-4 versus 2-3. So just off the bat, that's going to be better. But we think really diving into the quality is really what will set Stockton apart if they choose to go there.
Region 5.
All right, moving ahead to Region 5, which is just like Region 4 geographically, just a little bit more different. And so that's why you have Region 5. Top teams here are Widener, Catholic, and Hood. I think we felt very solid about those in that order. We didn't have too many discussions about changing anything there. I think that all looks very straightforward when you just look at the numbers. Then we had a very interesting conversation about Eastern and then kind of the trio of Centennial Conference teams. Eastern has a 682 winning percentage, a 598 strength of schedule, 2-6 versus regionally ranked. Then we have Hopkins, 783, 550. Gettysburg, 739 winning percentage, 515. And then a very similar resume to Franklin and Marshall, 739 winning percentage, 518. So we kind of went round and round and round and round and round and round on this. Zach, I don't know if you have any notes about what our conversation was like there.
Yeah, well, you're right. We come to that trio. But if you look at the winning percentage and the strength of schedule numbers, you get to the RRO category and they're pretty samey. But just in terms of winning percentage and strength of schedule, Johns Hopkins has a clear advantage in both of those categories. So we were comfortable taking them. Which was good for Hopkins and bad for Gettysburg, because Gettysburg has a sweep of Johns Hopkins, but because of those clear advantages that Johns Hopkins has, we slotted them in and avoided that direct comparison between Johns Hopkins and Gettysburg that really would have helped Gettysburg. But the other interesting dynamic here is if we were going to do a direct comparison with Hopkins and Gettysburg, we would also have to bring in Franklin and Marshall to the mix because of their similarity in resume to Gettysburg. And so that would really negate the Gettysburg advantage anyway, because then with those 3 teams, you've got a triangle where, like Gettysburg beat Hopkins, who beat Franklin and Marshall, right? So it kind of all comes out in a wash anyway. So just sometimes the way situations work out is sort of like bad luck for a team. And I think that's maybe the way it's playing out with Gettysburg. They would probably love a direct comparison with Hopkins, but for one reason or another, either Hopkins is just too far ahead or there's Franklin and Marshall nipping at the heels as well that would bring him in and set up this kind of triangle of death that negates a Gettysburg advantage anyway. So, I mean, in our process, we had Hopkins, so that really set up a direct comparison between Gettysburg and Franklin and Marshall for those last 2 spots. Well, and I guess you could even bring in Swarthmore, but Swarthmore was a clear just below the cut line, and that left Gettysburg and Franklin and Marshall for those last 2 spots, which ended up with Gettysburg ahead of F&M.
Yeah, I think it really came down to you. There's no way you can compare Hopkins with, like you said, without Franklin and Marshall bringing it into the mix. So those 3 teams, they've all, Hopkins is 2-0 against Franklin and Marshall is 2-0 against Gettysburg, who's 2-0 against Johns Hopkins. It just goes round and round. So Hopkins having the clear winning percentage and strength of schedule advantage, I think that became an easy decision that they're on top of the trio. And then we just had to compare them to Eastern for who did we want on top of that group. We ultimately went with Eastern. I don't think either of us were very, very for sure comfortable about that. Eastern only at 682 winning percentage, 598 strength of schedule versus Hopkins kind of having a more solidly even resume, 783 winning percentage, 550 strength of schedule, 2-6 versus regionally ranked, 3-5 versus regionally ranked. That's maybe a slight advantage for Hopkins.
But again, in terms, we talked with Region 4, if there's any sort of quality of RRO being taken into
Yes.
account, Eastern's win over Hood would be the best of that bunch there.
Right. So maybe
And
that evens out a little bit.
And the .048 advantage for Eastern in terms of strength of schedule, I think, is from what we've already seen from the committee in last week's rankings, is significant.
Yes, that seems significant. So we went with that factor. I wouldn't be shocked to see Hopkins 4 and maybe Eastern 5. I don't think Eastern probably falls below Gettysburg, but any kind of order of those two teams, I think it is okay there. But I think we did determine, because it immediately struck out to us, hey, Gettysburg's 2-0 against Johns Hopkins, but we kind of, through the process, I think the biggest thing we learned in Region 5 is it kind of doesn't matter in the way that this region stacks up.
Well, and from messaging we heard after last week's release, right, is that sometimes we were maybe too quick to look directly for the head-to-heads where it doesn't all work out, where it's a head-to-head comparison. Sometimes there's a multi-team situation, and I think we were very intentional about trying to look for maybe where those 3 or 4 team comparisons might be. And like we mentioned, if you are doing that here with those Centennial teams, it shows just how Gettysburg's sweep over Johns Hopkins gets negated by just all the other results that we've seen at the top of the Centennial.
Well, and it's not completely bad luck, right? They could have beaten Franklin and Marshall once, and they didn't. So, they had a chance to do that. All right, Region 6. I think right off it was difficult to make a decision at the top of this region. Randolph, Macon, and Hampton, Sydney. They're going to be 1-2, 2-1 in some order. We went with Randolph, Macon. Higher strength of schedule at this point. More wins versus regionally ranked. I guess that's an additional win and an additional loss versus regionally ranked opponents. Not really any strong common opponent difference that we can find. They've split the season series. So it's really just a conversation of, 43 points of winning percentage versus whatever it is, 20 points of strength of schedule, maybe an additional regionally ranked win. I don't know. We ended up with Randolph, Macon. I could see them going Hampton, Sydney. At the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter. These are maybe the top two of the top resumes in the entire country. When we see the top 16 reveal, these are going to be like 1 and 2 or 1, 2, and 3. They're going to be in that mix somewhere. So they're both at the top, both hosting resumes. It'll be interesting to see the exact order this week. We felt strongly about Guilford staying third, Virginia Wesleyan coming in fourth. Even though we saw Virginia Wesleyan beat Guilford this week, I think that was just to even up the season series. So I think they're 1-1 with each other. So again, you're just trying to figure out where are you tipping the scales on winning percentage and strength of schedule. For me, Guilford having, looking like the better winning percentage and a still very solid strength of schedule, I would put them ahead. Again, is there a world where that flips? Probably. But I think I'm okay with Guilford than Virginia Wesleyan. Christopher Newport, probably a solid 5 here. Good winning percentage, good strength of schedule. They've also, do they have a head-to-head loss to Virginia Wesleyan?
They lost to Virginia Wesleyan. Yeah, the loss to Virginia Wesleyan makes it very easy just to slot them in as a number 5 behind that top 4, and then ahead of what we're going to see for the 6, 7, and beyond.
And then, as was the case last week, I think the bottom of this region has some interesting conversations. We ended up jumping Emory into the rankings. I think we did not see them in the rankings last week in the alphabetical. They had 2 wins this week. So now you can see comparing them to a team like Roanoke, who was ranked last week. Winning percentage is now dead even. Roanoke still has a strength of schedule advantage by 20 points. But Emory's really going to shine on their results versus regionally ranked in this comparison. 6-6, Roanoke just 2-6. Also, if you want to fold in Mary Washington in this discussion right here, Mary Washington's only 2-7. You see Washington and Lee 2-6 down there. So Emory having kind of that they're even with other ranked teams around the country, I think that's going to bode well in their favor. If you looked at the 2 teams that we did not rank, Mary Wash and Washington and Lee, you really see that the resumes are kind of the same as Emory and Roanoke, just a little bit worse. And you never want to be the team that has, you're just another version of Roanoke, but you're not quite as good. You just take the team with the better resume right there. And then unfortunately for Maryville, Tennessee, they're not going to have the strength of schedule to compete. They're not going to have any positive results versus regionally ranked opponents. We didn't see them ranked last week. I don't think we're going to see them ranked this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the most difficult decisions come when you're at the bottom of a region there, you got to pick who's going to be in, who's going to be out, and you're dealing with like opposite ends of the spectrum resumes. But as it worked out here, we had basically four teams that are all grouped together, all very similar, kind of like mid 600s winning percentage with very strong
Yeah.
strength of schedule. So it's just like, okay, who are the two that have the best strength of schedule? They were the easy picks, and then it was just a matter of picking what differences are there between Emory and Roanoke, and certainly the results versus regionally ranked opponents stand out. So I think actually, we talk, Region 6, one of the best regions there that's out there, uh, deservedly so. But I feel like, maybe you could come up with some arguments to flip a team or two, but it's all within one spot, and I feel like there's a pretty well placed hierarchy developing here in Region 6.
Yeah.
Which, Matt, as we move on to Region 7, I think is the case in Region 7 as well. Another really deep region. However, I don't think that overall we're seeing a depth in terms of solid like NCAA criteria resumes that we saw last year in Region 7, getting to like, 8th, 9th, just outside the regional rankings. I don't think we have that same situation here this season. So it's like still a deep region, but in a different way. Like it's just good teams, but don't necessarily have like solid looking resumes like we saw a year ago. But take us through it. I think there's a pretty easy, slotting system for how Region 7 is developing.
Yeah, I think just at least starting at the top, John Carroll, I think, is an easy number one. 957 winning percentage, 573 strength of schedule, 5-1 versus regionally ranked. That's very strong. Case Western, I think, is an easy number two. 818, 581, 8-3 versus regionally ranked. That's a great number versus regionally ranked opponents. And we're going to start seeing Case when we start figuring ranked opponent quality. They've beaten NYU, who might be a number one, Oswego State, who might be a number one, Wash U, who might be a number one. That's going to, I think, really count very well in their favor. I don't think even this week it will overcome John Carroll with their advantage, very similar-ish strength of schedule and a very big advantage in the win percentage for John Carroll. But that'll be strong for Case down the stretch. I think there's, at this point, maybe a little bit of a gap to Trine, who's going to be, I think, a solid 3, but not really being encroached upon by Calvin at this point. We're going to see them maybe play this week, so we'll see what happens there. But Trine 3, and then we went Calvin 4, but I think it's at this point where we need to start having the Carnegie Mellon discussion in the region. So Calvin was 875, 38. Carnegie Mellon only has a 636 winning percentage, but they have a 600 strength of schedule, which does stand out at this point in Region 7. Once you get past the top two, you still have very good strength of schedules from Trine down to Hope, let's say, but they're more mid 500s. Carnegie Mellon coming in at 600. I think raises some eyebrows. Also, they're 6-4 versus regionally ranked, and they have some very good quality. As far as some maybe top-notch wins versus region-ranked opponents, teams that will rank number 1 or number 2 in their region. So I think Carnegie Mellon, the winning percentage doesn't strike you as all that strong, but their strength of schedule, their regionally ranked opponent results, I think, are very good. So is there a world maybe in which they're above Calvin? I don't know. I think if not, I think they slot in right behind them and probably above Mount Union at this point, even given Mount Union's significant 150 point advantage in winning percentage. It's just, again, for a lot of regionally ranked opponent results for Carnegie Mellon and 50 additional points of strength of schedule. We're going to have to figure out where Carnegie Mellon slots in. I guess I shouldn't say it's definitely above Mount Union. I think it probably is. I could see them anywhere as one spot above Calvin to one spot below Mount Union, but I think they probably do stay above Hope.
All right, and this is what we were talking about. Ultimately, we decided maybe the strength of schedule and the RROs are enough for them to overcome a 150 point gap in winning percentage. But then, as we were talking about, do they get in over Calvin? And then we're talking about making up 230 points of winning percentage gap. And like you said, maybe it happens. I don't think we would be shocked to see it happen. But for us, as we were trying to put together regional ranking predictions, that felt like going too far. But still having them ahead of Mount Union, we feel like we're giving them a significant amount of credit to overcome a 150 point gap. But we'll see. I think despite the 636 winning percentage, I think it's clear that Carnegie Mellon will get ranked this week.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of we'll see, how high it is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, they're getting ranked. I think it would be extreme for them to be above Calvin. But then again, my computer fake rating put them that high. I think I maybe overcorrected after the first set of regional rankings, the alphabetical regional rankings, and maybe tuned it a little bit too high toward the strength of schedule. Maybe I'm still a little bit too high in the credit I'm giving teams for regionally ranked wins or quality of regionally ranked wins. We'll have to see. But yeah, they ended up very, very competitive with Calvin, which surprised me. That would also really surprise me for kind of like the Pool C at large mix. So I'm betting that they are behind our Calvin Knights there. But it will be very interesting to see. This is another thing to watch that I'll be looking for right away is where does Carnegie Mellon slot in? I think we'll learn a lot about the committees, the Region 7 committee and the National Committee about where that finally ends up. I should also note in this region, we saw Marietta in the alphabetical rankings. They had a little bit of a tough week. I think they have fallen kind of completely out of the ranking picture at this point. If you wanted to pick the next teams, it might be like St. Vincent or Otterbein or Worcester or something like that. I think it's not really Marietta in the mix anymore.
There we go. It's Region 7. All right, Matt, Region 8. This is a fun one.
Yeah, Region 8. Again, it's just so surprising that Region 8 drops off in quality so fast. We have Wash U staying number 1. Well, I guess not staying. We didn't really know the last week was alphabetical, so we don't really know. We're putting them number 1 this week. A very similar winning percentage to Illinois Wesleyan. An advantage there, slim advantage for Illinois Wesleyan. A significant strength of schedule gap for Wash U, 597 versus 547. So that's a big advantage in Wash U's favor. Regionally ranked opponents, though, tells a different story. 2-5 for Wash U, a win over maybe a number 1 case. Illinois Wesleyan has 5 wins and 3 losses against regionally ranked opponents, a win versus Wash U, who's maybe a number 1 or maybe a number 2. They've also beaten Elmhurst, who's next on this list here. So I think that's an advantage for Illinois Wesleyan. I think you definitely have the conversation. I know there was a conversation going on Sunday night on Twitter about who would be ranked number 1 in this region. For me, I think I would go right now with Wash U, but I think the committee is going to have that discussion. I would not be completely shocked to see Illinois Wesleyan 1, Wash U 2. I think I don't think that's what we're going to go this week. It's also interesting if you compare maybe these numbers to what we saw a slide ago. Like Illinois Wesleyan is what, like 5th or 6th maybe in Region 7. So just an interesting comparison, a team in a region who's maybe having a discussion to be number 1 in the region and where they would slot in, Region 7 or Region 6 is a very different spot. Then we went kind of going down the list a little further. Sorry to jump in back in on you, Zach. We went Elmhurst, I think, is a solid number 3. And then it gets a really messy around number 4. We went with Wisconsin Lutheran and then Carthage. We jumped St. Norbert into the rankings, just 1 spot above Anderson. And then we had Chicago fall out of our rankings despite having what's left with a pretty good strength of schedule, 539, and one of the better results versus regionally ranked at 3 and 4.
Yeah, just going back to the top, I feel like these are the cases that are really hard because just intuitively as a fan, when there's a head-to-head advantage in play here, it feels like the default should always be to go with that team. But I think, like you said, I could see this going either way. We talked about it. I don't think we would be surprised either way. I don't think there's a clear answer necessarily. That's why I say, like, intuitively, it always feels like the head-to-head should allow things to settle out. But again, these are not our regional rankings. What we are doing is trying to predict what the committee will do, and some of the signaling that we feel like we've received from either past committees or what we've seen so far is that 50 points of strength of schedule difference is significant.
Very significant, yeah.
Very significant, right? So does Illinois Wesleyan's RRO difference, is that as significant of a difference versus the strength of schedule difference? I don't know. Certainly the head-to-head, you either have it or you don't, and Illinois Wesleyan has it. So you feel like that's significant. But again, 50-point strength of schedule difference, we know the way that's been valued. So I think go back to it. We've said when in doubt, go strength of schedule. I think there's enough here to be in doubt, and so that's the way we're going to go now. But it could be that Illinois Wesleyan is first when we see the rankings, and I don't think that's undeserved. I don't think we would be shocked either way.
Yeah. A couple of other comparisons, maybe just of interest in Region 8. St. Norbert does have a head-to-head win over Wisconsin Lutheran. We did not jump them above Wisconsin Lutheran. We saw that last week even. Wisconsin Lutheran was ranked and St. Norbert wasn't ranked, and they both had similar numbers to maybe where they were last year or last week, and maybe moved in the same direction. We have St. Norbert above Anderson. Their resumes, winning percentage and strength of schedule wise, are very similar, but St. Norbert having that one win versus regionally ranked, I think helps them significantly there and boosts them above Anderson. Chicago fell out, even though they have the better strength of schedule. I think 591. We're talking about significant gaps in winning percentage there. So we'll have to see. But you could have a Carthage versus Chicago discussion. I don't know if we have direct common opponents or whatever there. I know they both lost to Illinois Wesleyan, for example. So we'll see. It wouldn't be completely surprised if Chicago finds their way into this region, maybe above an Anderson or whatnot. But this is just a really difficult region to gauge just because we have resumes that are very different from each other and not really a lot of quality to bank on. So you're making a lot of decision about very marginal resumes.
Yeah, Chicago will be an interesting team to watch. Going back to what we talked about in Region 7, it's not the Carnegie resume, right? Because Chicago doesn't have as good of a winning percentage, doesn't have as good of a strength of schedule. But of course, you're looking at Carnegie Mellon in the context of Region 7. The Chicago resume, while not on the level of Carnegie Mellon, they're only competing in the context of Region 8. So a 539 in the grand scheme of things is not remarkable. But when you're talking about strength of schedules in the 460s here at the bottom of Region 8, well, suddenly a 539 looks pretty amazing.
Really good, yeah.
Now, we're still talking, 230. Again, this is what we talked about with Carnegie, right? 230 points of winning percentage. Is that enough to overcome? Well, at this point, probably not. But a couple wins by Chicago, and suddenly they're right back in the mix.
Yeah, we could get the whole bottom of this region completely wrong and in a wrong order. It'll be interesting to see how this comes out.
Well, as we talked about it, Matt, we talked about Carthage having an observed advantage. Once we saw how the regional rankings came out last week, Carthage was in. So we took into account that, okay, clearly in that picture, Carthage had an advantage, whether, we don't know exactly how those discussions played out. So we slotted them in 5th, and then it just came a decision for those last spots with St. Norbert and Anderson. However, Matt, as we were discussing it and you noted, Carthage's winning percentage advantage shrunk.
Yeah.
Right. So this is week by week, the situation changes a little bit, and maybe the advantage we observed by Carthage getting in last week shrunk enough where sometime those decisions this time around get changed. I don't know that happens. I think I'm pretty comfortable with what we have here, but we'll see. This is why it'll be interesting to finally get to see how they actually come out in ranked order as opposed to just in one bucket of 7 teams.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, that brings us to Region 9. I think slam dunk at the top for right now is still UW-Platteville. I think we felt pretty good about Nebraska Wesleyan, number 2. You get into a little bit of a mess with a lot of the American Rivers teams. They've kind of beaten each other. But for right now, Nebraska Wesleyan is 2-0 versus Co. So we took them second. We took Co third. And then Dubuque fourth. Dubuque or Co above Dubuque based on the 1-0 head-to-head there. Largely, I'm kind of hand-waving a lot of discussion we had right there. But that kind of set the top 4. And then we thought there was a big enough kind of gap between maybe Dubuque and the rest of the teams that we didn't need to consider Loras and Central at the same time as Dubuque and Co and Nebraska Wesleyan. So we weren't going to do a multi-compare and bring Loras in because Loras has, let's say, beaten Nebraska Wesleyan twice. Central has a win over Dubuque and a win over Co and a win over Loras. So we decided after Dubuque, there was a big enough gap there that those other teams were not going to be compared at the same time. That's one way we handled this. We did have a big, long discussion about Bethany Lutheran, Loras, and Central in particular, and we also did fold St. John's into that discussion as well. We didn't feel like Illinois College or Carleton or anyone else in the region was really competitive at the end of the day. So where we landed on was Bethany Lutheran 5th, a really good 870 winning percentage, a very mild 504 strength of schedule, 2-1 versus regionally ranked. They do have a win over Central, which is maybe relevant if we're looking at kind of these next two teams. We figured Loris second, 826 winning percentage, 502 strength of schedule, so very in line with Bethany Lutheran there. They have a much better record versus regionally ranked opponents, 5-3, so that's going to stand out. If the committee for them ever looks at the secondary criteria, that's just a 392 non-conference strength of schedule, though. So we were wondering if maybe Loris wouldn't get a great benefit of the doubt because they didn't really schedule outside of conference, although their conference does provide them plenty of challenge and plenty of ability to rack up some of those regionally ranked wins like they have, and they've taken advantage of that. So credit to Loris for that. And then we ended up Central 7th. Just a 682 winning percentage, but a 562 strength of schedule. So again, we had to have that, how does this weigh in factor with between Loris and Bethany Lutheran and stronger winning percentages and lower strength of schedules? I think we're all sick of that discussion, but we have to have it multiple times per region. Central is 3-5 versus regionally ranked, a good win against Dubuque, and then one head-to-head versus Loris, but that was a split. Central and Loris split, so I don't think that's an overwhelming factor there.
Yeah, I mean, the American Rivers, we've talked about it throughout the year. That conference race is impossible to pick. I don't know who the favorite is. It probably changes week by week. But as we went through this process, it was interesting to see how we didn't really have to worry about that muddled mix of 5 teams. Because as you mentioned, like Nebraska Wesleyan, when you look at the winning percentage, you look at the strength of schedule, you look at the RROs, it's at least kind of in the same ballpark as everyone there in the RRO category. But with the 870 winning percentage, is like at the top end of the group. The 531 strength of schedule is certainly competitive with the rest of the group. So Nebraska Wesleyan kind of stood out as a number 2 there behind Platteville. And then with the balance between winning percentage and strength of schedule for and Dubuque, they stood out from, that Loris Central group.
Right.
So at that point, all we had to do was compare and Dubuque for those, 3 and 4 spots. So I tell you what, in terms of the conference race, that's going to be a great conference tournament because you got 5 legitimate contenders there. And really 5 teams that are probably worthy of making it to the NCAA tournament. We'll see if all 5 can get in. But as this process played out, we didn't really have to deal with them as one big muddled mix. It sorted out pretty nicely. You mentioned St. John's. I think they still loom in this process. They have a resume that's more balanced than some of those other ones that we talked about for those last 3 spots in this region. But there's nothing that really stands out as a reason to be drawn to them. But they're definitely looming in this process. Matt, I think this is one where we clipped another snapshot just for the multi-team comparison as we talked about Loris Central and Bethany Lutheran, just to help bring the picture into view there. As you said, Bethany Lutheran does have the head-to-head over Central, and Central and Loris split. You look at the common opponents there; they've all played Wartburg and Simpson. But that's an area where maybe Bethany Lutheran doesn't look quite as good. They're 1-1 there. Loris 3-1, and Central 4-0. So it's a little bit of a take your pick triangle here with these 3. I think you could throw these 3 in a hat, pick out a name, and you know what? You might be right. Not a lot separating them. You have the disparate resumes there with Bethany Lutheran standing out in terms of winning percentage. You've got Central standing out in terms of strength of schedule. You have Loris standing out in terms of the record versus regionally ranked opponents. I don't know.
And then you have St. John's kind of in the middle of everyone in everything. There's still a world in which St. John's, I think, gets ranked. We just felt like that their resume was maybe more blah, whereas the other teams were maybe winning a discussion. But yeah, I think you could see anything from, St. John's being in and Bethany Lutheran being all the way out, even though we have them 5th. Just because you have to rank a team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that doesn't mean there's always a big gap between those teams. I think for us here, between 5 and 8, they're very tight. Bethany Lutheran, Loris, Central, St. John's, they're all very tight. There wasn't a big gap for us. So almost any order that the committee comes with, I think, was something that'll make sense. And if we see Bethany Lutheran, let's say, be all the way out, I don't know. It's because, we got things so wrong. It's just that we were trying to make tight decisions, and the committee just made a slightly different tight decision between all those teams for it than we did.
Right. And St. John's may be out this week, but hey, this is week 2 snapshot in time.
Yeah.
If they if they win, and let's say Loris stumbles and suddenly that winning percentage doesn't look quite as good for Loris, well, you could see a situation very easily with St. John's looming there that St. John's works their way in. So they're definitely in that mix, even though we felt like they didn't quite compete with the data we have available today.
Yeah. If you win and another team loses, you might pass that team. Thank you.
All right, one more region to go here, Matt. Here is Region 10. I feel like this is another one. We had a few discussions we'll go through, but, kind of slots through fairly nicely.
Yeah, Trinity, Texas hung on to beat Colorado College on Sunday. That maybe would have changed the order at the top, but I think as of right now, they are number 1 in this region, and Cal Lutheran is number 2. Both of these teams look very strong, both in the winning percentage and strength of schedule, and regionally ranked opponents' nature. So they're all teams that will kind of compete nationally. They're all teams that we could see in that top 16 reveal. They're both teams that we could see in the top 16. They're kind of, I think Trinity, Texas for sure, maybe right now seems like they could be in that mix. Cal Lutheran is right in there as well. So we could see both those teams. Then we had a little bit of a discussion about who should be 2, but I think we were who should be 3. But we were very comfortable with Pomona Pitzer at the end of the day. 750 winning percentage shakes out well with the rest of the teams kind of maybe on the board or in the discussion. And then the 557 winning strength of schedule was kind of tops of that as well. So you have one of the better winning percentages in a strength of schedule that stands out. Just 1-4 versus regionally ranked. But, to be honest, we don't see a ton of regionally ranked wins remaining. You maybe don't want to see 1 win versus 4 losses, maybe when compared to maybe a St. Thomas who's 2-0 right now. But still, they do have a win, and I think the strength of schedule is going to carry that resume. So we were comfortable keeping Pomona Pitzer 3rd. Then we had a little bit of a trio discussion. St. Thomas, Claremont Mudd Scripps, and Hardin Simmons. We weren't quite sure of the order. All have kind of these middle 770-ish strength of schedules and kind of low 500. Middle 770s winning percentage and kind of low-ish 500 strength of schedule. So we wanted to do a kind of triple comparison here, and I think we have a slide for this one, Zach, that we can bring up. So this was our discussion here. You can see that Hardin Simmons has played St. Thomas. They lost. Claremont Mudd Scripps did not play either of these teams head-to-head, and St. Thomas had the win over Hardin Simmons. So one thing that we discussed, we're not quite sure how the committee handles this situation. If they bring up 3 teams that they want to compare together and they feel like they need to discuss together because they can't separate, would a single head-to-head like St. Thomas over Hardin Simmons really factor that much? Or since Claremont Mudd Scripps isn't involved, would they not really consider that in kind of comparing 3 teams in a multi-comparison setting? So I think we intuitively feel like that should kind of help slot St. Thomas above Hardin Simmons, even though Claremont is not really in that discussion. But that's one thing that we don't really know how the committees factor that. Do they make sure that any head-to-head is with all teams involved, or do they do any head-to-head that might be relevant among any teams involved? We're not quite sure.
The other advantage for St. Thomas being the common opponent, all 3 of these teams did play Trinity, Texas, with St. Thomas being the only one to get a win out of that. Trinity beat CMS and beat Hardin Simmons. So that is ultimately how we ended up with St. Thomas in that 4 spot. And then that turns it into a head-to-head between CMS and Hardin Simmons, and a little more in favor of Claremont Mudd Scripps there.
Yeah, even though Hardin Simmons had the winning percentage advantage, 2-3 versus regionally ranked versus 0-2. It's never good to have 0 wins versus regionally ranked. If they're looking at quality, Cal Lu and Pomona Pitzer are both very strong, particularly Cal Lu, going to be number 1 or number 2 in this region. So Claremont Mudd Scripps has a good quality win there. We could see a different order here. We could see Claremont behind Hardin Simmons. For us, we took Claremont 5th, Hardin Simmons 6th. It'll be interesting to see what the committee does there. And then just rounding out the region, we think Whitworth is a solid 7. You could maybe have the discussion again with Whitman, but there was a 2-0 head-to-head in Whitworth's favor. Also a fairly significant strength of schedule advantage there. So I think we were good with the Pirates staying in at number 7.
And Whitworth also picks up the win over originally ranked opponent, by beating Elmhurst
Yes.
earlier this year. So yeah, again, just similar discussions we had that for that last spot last week between Whitman and Whitworth, but really played out very similarly. I think, in hindsight, Matt, I think you said that maybe the head-to-head didn't even really matter just because of the strength of schedule advantage that Whitworth had. That alone, they may have just been in based on that. But yeah, when you break it down, there's really no question that Whitworth takes that last spot ahead of Whitman.
Yeah, and the only other thing would be, do you want to have the Redlands discussion with Whitworth? I think we decided we didn't really, but there's 34 points of strength of schedule and about 80 or 81 points of winning percentage. So that's maybe in line with what we've seen compared previously. Redlands does have 2 wins versus regionally ranked. They also have 7 losses. So I don't really know that they overcome Whitworth at the end of the day. Especially if you're having to go all the way down to a 591 winning percentage. I would expect Redlands to stay out. We also saw last week that they were not ranked, so I don't see any reason to put Redlands in at this point.
Well, and also if we hear that your winning percentage gets you to the table for discussion, yeah, it's kind of a tough thing to look at Redlands their sub 600 winning percentage and to say that that's enough to bring them into the discussion at this point.
Yep, that's true. All right, that's
So
the regions.
Those are the 10 regions.
So, Zach, that brings us to our pick slate recap. Here's our games from last week, running down the picks here. First game was DeSales at Stevens. DeSales was slight road favorites. We both went with Stevens, but DeSales covered that spread, and we both missed the pick. John Carroll was 4-point favorites at Mount Union. They won by 8. We both got that pick. Moving on to CCIW play, Elmhurst was 1.5-point underdogs in the road at Illinois Wesleyan. They won that game handily by 12. Illinois Wesleyan gets the point. Zach, you get that one.
Why do you hate the Titans, Matt?
Next is Wash U at Emory. Wash U was 6.5-point underdogs. We thought that was too large of a spread. It was not quite large enough. Emory wins that game by 13. We missed that pick. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week, the big game that everyone was talking about this past week for sure, was Trinity at Tufts, 5.5-point spread. We thought, Zach, that was going to be too big for a big NESCAC showdown like this between two heavyweights in that conference, but Trinity handled Tufts, got the 82-66 win. We both missed that one. So here's our recap of the week. And Zach, you went 2-3. I only went 1-4. So I drop a game on you in my chase. I'm still 2 games back. You're in the lead. How do you feel?
Feel great. It was getting close there, Matt. You had the lead cut down to 1. So I was glad that if I'm going to suffer a 2-3 week, that at least you were 1-4. I gained that game back.
Still a 1-possession game here, contest, Zach. We're getting towards the end. I might start fouling. How are you at free throws?
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see how many freebies we get this week. Here's our pick slate. The game number 1, Mount Union, 3-point favorites at Marietta. Going down to Texas, Trinity, Texas, 3-point favorites at St. Thomas. A couple of road favorites to start us off. In the NCAC, Worcester is even. They're going to be at Wabash. And then a big one out in California, Pomona-Pitzer, 6.5-point underdogs at Cal Lutheran. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week, Zach, a chance for you to redeem yourself. It's Calvin at Shrine, 4-point underdogs for Calvin. Depending on what the teams do on Wednesday, this could be a chance for them to maybe split a championship if Calvin can get a win. So let's go back to the top and make our picks. Mount Union and Marietta. The computer has a 3-point line. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in this game other than I'm convinced it's going to overtime. I don't know if anyone plays as many overtime games as Marietta. Unfortunately, they seem like a team that can just never get over the hump, but I'll go with a road dog here. Give me the 3 points to work with. I will go Pioneers.
All right. I am going to go the other way. I'm going to go with Mount Union. I've just seen Marietta struggle recently. I feel like Mount Union's maybe playing a little bit better than them. I know it's 3 points. I know it's on the road. The Banjo's a tough place to play, but I think that Mount Union gets this done, and maybe by 5 or so. Down in Texas, Trinity 3-point computer favorite. St. Thomas, who do you like?
I like Trinity in this one, Matthew. They will have revenge on their mind, having lost at home to St. Thomas earlier in the year. And I happen to know that Trinity is a team that keeps an eye on the national picture. They know what is at stake here heading down the stretch. Give me the Tigers.
All right, I'm also going to go with the Trinity Tigers. I think they're going to get it done with St. Thomas. They did have a close one with Colorado College on Sunday that maybe could have gone either way. That's a tough conference. There's a lot of tough games. I think Trinity gets it done on the road. They're the SCAC champs after all. Going down to the NCAC, Zach, Worcester and Wabash. Even, it's a pick 'em. Who do you like?
A pick 'em game in conference play. Give me the home team every time.
All
Little
right.
Giants.
This is going to be another one that we're going to go opposite sides of. I'm going to take Worcester. I think their Scots are playing really well right now. I think that they can smell that NCAC championship maybe coming if they can get some big wins. We'll see. We'll see what the Scots do. But I think they can win this game even on the road. Going out to California next, Pomona and Cal Lutheran. Big spread, kind of a big spread here. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, it's the spread that gives me a little pause, Matt. I don't know. Maybe I'm just going to be a little bit too afraid to lay it. I really like Kalu. I think they've proven themselves to be the class of the conference out there, but 6.5 points to work with here. Give me the Pitzer.
Yeah, I really like Kalu as well as a team, but I think in a game like this, I think it maybe just stays close. Pomona Pitzer playing maybe for their tournament lives. I think they need a win like this to kind of keep in the mix there, the bubble mix, if they cannot win the SCIAC Pool C. So I think they have a lot of motivation. I'm going to go with the Pitzer as well, mostly because I think that spread's a little bit too large. And then we're going to go to the game of the week being held down in Angola, Indiana. Computer likes Trine by 4. Zach, but what do you think?
I like Calvin in this one, Matthew. Give me the Knights. You mentioned the possible implications for the conference race. This would also be a great win to add to an already pretty good national tournament resume for Calvin. Matt, give me the Knights.
Yeah, Zach, it might be no surprise to you that I'm going to go with our hometown Calvin Knights as well. This is going to be a good game. It's going to be a close game. I think this was a one-possession game at Calvin that Trine won earlier in the season. I do feel like Calvin can compete with Trine very well. So we'll see what happens down in Angola. But I think they can definitely keep it within 4. Maybe Calvin can win this one outright. We'll have to see. Trine did drop that game to Olivet this week, so they're looking vulnerable, and that opened the door for Calvin to maybe split a championship with them if they both take care of business on Wednesday. That's the picks. I think we have a mailbag. Do we have a mailbag?
We do have a mailbag, Matt. This was a fun one to dig into a little bit here from JR. With Randolph, Macon, Hampton, Sydney, and Guilford all in the top 10, when is the last time a single conference had 3 top 10 teams in the same conference tournament? Now, Matt, Guilford this past week dropped a game. Maybe their hold on a top 10 spot is in doubt, but we will see. So what I did to answer this question, I dug into the d3hoops.com top 25 archives, and the question was specifically asking about heading into a conference tournament. So we get, the final poll, we get the second to last poll, which is after regular season play. So I went to the third to last poll, going through the full d3hoops.com tenure, which stretches from 1999-2000 season until today. And Matt, I was actually a little bit surprised to find out you don't have to go back very far to find out the last time this happens. During the 21-22 season, the WIAC had 3 top 10 teams heading into conference tournament play there with Oshkosh, Platteville, and UW La Crosse. It's happened a total of 4 times. Before that 21-22 season, there was the 2012-13 season. The NESCAC had Amherst, Middlebury, and Williams all in the top 10. 2010-11, the NESCAC did it again with the same 3 teams, Williams, Middlebury, and Amherst. And then the WIAC, Matt, again, 2008-2009 did it for the first time. There we had Platteville, Stevens Point, and Whitewater all in the top 10 heading into conference tournament play. So 4 times.
When I saw this question come in, and Jay did submit that before Guilford ended up dropping their game, but I immediately thought of the WIAC 2022 maybe having that chance. I didn't remember if La Crosse was just above the line or just below the line, but I remember Platteville and Oshkosh were definitely ranked very high that year. Sure. So I thought that one had a chance, and good to see it did. So interesting question, yeah, and not surprising that NESCAC and WIAC are maybe 2 of the teams that have done it. ODAC, another team of that ilk. Obviously, UAA can't be an answer here because they don't have a tournament.
But they would still participate in the poll.
Well,
at this time.
Right. They don't have a conference tournament, yeah.
All right, so that's it for the mailbag, Matt. Just the one question. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to JR for giving us the chance to dig into that one. If you have anything that you'd like to submit for a future mailbag, you can send it to us on social media. Drop it as a comment here on this video, and we will tackle it at the end of a future episode. Always fun to answer the questions, Matt, that we get directly from listeners and viewers. Talk about the things they want us to talk about. Otherwise, we just talk about what we want to talk about. All right, Matt, that wraps up this week's episode. We need to wrap it up with a big thank you to everyone who has supported us on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/D3Datacast for all the information on what that's all about, how you can dive in at a deeper level and support the work that we do. We appreciate everyone who's been along with us during the season here, and honored to have added to the ranks here, Matt, it seems like, with each passing week.
Yeah, just a fun mix of people who've partnered with us and supported us on Patreon. It's D3 fans, it's D3 parents, it's D3 coaches, it's former D3 players who are still playing professionally and abroad. A lot of people love Division 3 basketball. A lot of people love D3 hoops. We do what we do because we love the game as well. We love the level. We like to support it. We like to talk about it. So just appreciation for everyone else that has shared with us. If you're interested in joining us on Patreon as well, keeping the site ad-free, d3datacast.com. You can get information there, or patreon.com/d3datacast. Thank you so much. We'll look forward to those regional rankings on Tuesday, Zach, see how many we got right this week. But we're looking forward to that. Good job, team.